Hello and a very good afternoon to all our viewers who are joining me in this live interaction on News 9's Facebook as well as YouTube page. And like we all know, artificial intelligence has now turned out to be a lifesaver across many scenarios. In fact, AI has now made our lives easier and less complicated. And like I told you a few moments back, artificial intelligence can also be a lifesaver. Now, you might be wondering how. Well, that's exactly what we will discuss with you today in this short but informative interaction session. Now, although effective treatments are available for those at risk, clinicians do not have a reliable way of predicting if their patients are likely to take the extreme step. Now, to make things easier and to save more lives across the globe, researchers at the Medical University of South Carolina and University of South Florida have taken important steps towards addressing the problem by creating an artificial intelligence algorithm that can automatically identify patients at high risk of intentional self-harm based on the information in the clinical notes in the electronic health record. Now, this particular team used complex artificial neural networks, which is a form of artificial intelligence, also known as deep learning, in order to analyze textual data in the electronic health record. Now, deep learning methods progressively uses layers of artificial networks in order to extract higher information from raw input data. So far, the researchers have primarily relied on structured data in the electronic health record for the identification and also the prediction of patients at risk. Now, in order to answer a few questions, we have with us Dr. Vijay Maitri, who is a consultant psychiatrist. Many thanks for joining us on this live interaction, Dr. Vijay. And my first question to you is, how do doctors normally identify a person who is at risk of committing self-harm?
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Okay. So when we talk about self-harm or suicide, suicide is an act of taking one's own life. Okay. So when we talk about the causative factors, suicide is a complex phenomenon. There is no one particular factor where we can pinpoint and say, okay, this is the exact reason why a person tends to attempt for suicide. Okay, there are certain medical factors, there are certain psychological factors, and then there are certain socio-cultural factors. Okay. So the more the risk factors, the more the possibility of a person attempting to suicide. So some of the risk factors are mainly psychological disorders like depression, severe anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, substance use like alcohol and other drugs. So these are some of the medical causes or psychiatric risk factors for a person to attempt suicide. Then there are other social factors like lack of social support, loss of employment, financial losses, then death of a near and dear one, divorce. Okay, so all this is some of the social factors which also contribute to a person attempting to suicide. Okay, so now that being said, suicide is a medical emergency. It's a psychiatric emergency. Now, once a person attempts for suicide, complete suicide, there's nothing much can be done. Okay, so the only thing what we can do is that to predict suicidal attempts or self-harm behavior and then for timely intervention. Now, there are certain predictors which we use as to see like whether the possibility of a person attempting for suicide or harming himself or herself is there. Okay, so some of the possible predictors are, as I told you, the presence of these disorders, these psychiatric disorders themselves are a predictor for that self-harm behavior. And one single most important predictable factor is history of similar kind of attempts in the past. Okay, so if there are any similar attempts, any attempts of self-harm or suicide attempts in the past, that is the single most important indicator that the possibility of a person attempting similar kind of issues in the future is also more. Okay, so based on the history from the person himself or herself, based on the history what we gather from the informant, which is either a friend or a family member or a colleague, and based on what we see in the patient, what we observe during the clinical interview, we tend to assess what could be the risk of a person attempting for suicide. Okay, so based on the severity of the intent of suicide attempt, okay, we tend to manage patients. That's how it is. The most important factor is to predict. Yes, sometimes it could be difficult on our part. Not every attempts can be predicted.
Does electronic health record help you in predicting it, doctor?
Yes. Okay. So when we speak about use of technology in healthcare, particularly in concerning with risk factors for suicide, yes, it can be used. Okay. So when, as I told you, the single most predictor of suicide attempt or self-harm is past history of attempt. Okay. So sometimes there could be a pattern kind of thing. Okay, so use of electronic records, one thing we may be able to know whether is there any pattern which is happening, and we can collaborate the data across various places, across various social cultural backgrounds, across various disorders. Okay, so let's say suicide can happen in depression, suicide can happen in bipolar disorder, suicide can happen in schizophrenia or any other issues. That itself is not enough for us to predict as to predict the outcome of attempts. Okay, so by using the data, be it electronic data, printed data, whatever it's there, and by use of artificial intelligence, there are various forms of artificial intelligence like machine learning, deep learning, what you mentioned, and all those things. Okay, so this artificial intelligence may predict the possibility of similar kind of attempts in the future. Okay, so if that is possible, it's easier on the part of a mental health professional for them to predict the attempt of similar kind of things in the future.
Now, doctor, do you think that artificial intelligence would help you all identify people? And also, what do you think about, artificial intelligence replacing doctors in a distant future?
To some extent, yes. See, use of technology has been creeping in almost all professions. Yes, these days, the doctors, be it in medical field also, there is some kind of infiltration technology. Like, let's see, previously, like if you go back a decades back, diagnosis was only based on clinical interview and physical examination. Later on, there was a battery of investigations which came in. Similarly, things can get easier. Okay, by using artificial intelligence, a doctor or any clinician, it might be easier for him or her to deal with one particular illness. And to what extent artificial intelligence will replace professionals, that is something which we have to wait and see. Okay. But at the end of the day, even if artificial intelligence gets involved, gets inculcated, but at some point of time, it will require the help of a professional, healthcare professional.
That's true. Many thanks for joining me on this live interaction, Dr. Vijay. Well, like you heard it, technology might probably replace doctors in the distant future, but the person-to-person interaction will not be the same in case of an artificial intelligence. So why wait for such a technology to come and address your problems, whereas you yourself can identify your social circle, find out if a person is committing self-harm to himself or herself, find out those kind of people, encourage them to approach the nearest psychiatrist, and also help them to cope up with the mental health, because COVID-19 has brought about severe stress among people across the globe. So in such testing times, it is either one for all or all for one, and we will have to stand up for those kind of people who are suffering from various mental traumas and also who are very vulnerable to committing self-harm. So if you guys have liked this piece of information that I've shared with you all, please do drop in your comments, and also most importantly, like, share and subscribe to News 9 Digital on various social media platforms. Many thanks for joining us.